Hello, chart watchers and DecisionPoint faithful. My name is Erin Swenlin from DecisionPoint.com, and today I am going to talk about DecisionPoint Climax Analysis. This has been something that we've come up with over the years, and we're finding it to be particularly helpful in finding short-term pivot points in the market. So I talk about it often in my DecisionPoint alert, but I don't go into the nuts and bolts. So today I figured I would do that for you. So we're going to look at Climax Analysis. And as part of Climax Analysis, there are a couple of different tools that we use, the VIX being one. We look at breadth as well. Total volume is usually a key component. And then for confirmation, we look at the volume ratios for the New York Stock Exchange and for the S&P 500. This all sounds a little complicated, but honestly, once you start seeing them on the charts, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about upside versus downside climaxes and how we determine which is which. We'll also be talking about upside downside climaxes, but in addition to that, we'll look at initiations versus exhaustion climaxes. So there are two components. You're deciding whether it's an upside or a downside climax, but then the important part is to determine, is it an exhaustion of the current move, or is it an initiation of a new move? Before I get started, I do want to let everybody know that we do have a free live trading room on Mondays from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern. It's very easy to register. If you just go to DecisionPoint.com, you'll be good to go. And you can also sign up for our free newsletter there as well. So recommend you check it out if you're especially interested in what I'm talking about today. I get into stock symbols as well when I do the trading room. All right, so what is a climax day? Well, usually that would be a short 1 to 2 day signal. So when we get these climaxes, it doesn't necessarily mark a long-term pivot point in the market, usually a short term and even a very short term in some regards. Sometimes it is only for a day or two that you get the follow through on these climax days, but they're pretty accurate when we do get them. So we have to determine, is it going to be a reversal or a continuation when we do get a climax day? And again, I'll discuss that a little bit more. We look at initiation climaxes, like I said, so that's the beginning of a move, or we're looking at exhaustion climaxes, something that's finishing off a move. We get that climax, and then we're going to see a reversal instead of a continuation. So let's go ahead and look at some charts, and I will get into what I'm talking about right now. All right, so this is our very short-term indicator chart, our climax chart, as we like to call it. This is a chart that I go over every single day, market day, in the DecisionPoint alert. So if this is something you're interested in and you want to be alerted to these upside and downside climaxes, a subscription to the DP alert is where you'll want to go. So we are recording this on September 13th. So we'll go a little bit back in time to discuss some of the previous climaxes, because we haven't had one in quite some time, at least over a week, and that's kind of a long time for us. I was looking to see if we might get an upside initiation today, but we did get higher prices. We do have a little bit of a tail there, sort of hammer-like, which is positive, but I didn't get any confirmation with a climax day. So what we look at are new highs and new lows. Usually on a climax day, you're going to see these spike in one direction or the other. We also look at breadth, the net AD, net advances and declines, and the net advance decline volume. So what we want to look for are spikes outside of this normal range, if you will, between 300 and minus 300. And in terms of the net AD volume, you're looking at more minus 2,000 versus plus 2,000. So what you're looking for are those days when you get an outside reading. So for example, we had an outside reading here, but we didn't see that on the net AD volume. We also didn't see much going on with the VIX that day. we did get a pullback on those new highs. So there were a few things that gave us what we would call a whiff of a climax last week. But let's look at a couple of climaxes that we know hit, that we know were there. So we're looking at the breadth. We're looking also at the VIX. The VIX, I think, is a really great indicator, and usually it alerts us as well to climax behavior, because usually you're going to see a puncture of either the lower Bollinger Band or the upper band. And typically when you get those, you can see right here, that's usually going to mark a reversal in the market when we get these really high readings on the VIX. I do invert the VIX because oversold we think should be on the bottom and overbought on the top. So you'll see that we'll get these punctures of that lower Bollinger Band. And a lot of times those are going to match up with a climax day. Like you can see right here, we had outside readings there. We had highly elevated reading here, not necessarily outside the zone, but certainly very high. So when you get these, and you can see there was a climax the day before, right? We had elevated net AD to the negative side. So we're going to study these two climaxes more in terms of really getting an idea of what these are about. Typically, you're looking also for high total volume. In this case, we did get that, but we have it marked with a pink asterisk because it was options expiration. So you're usually going to see a lot of elevated volume that day, and it may not necessarily be signaling a climax, but it's something to keep in mind. So we did get really high total volume on that negative look there, those negative bars. And then we got on this positive climax, if you will, we had that puncture and it moved much higher. You also had maybe not as elevated total volume, but we still had these very high readings that we would consider climactic or a climax day. So I'm going to look at these two climax days in particular. So now that we've looked at the climax chart, and we know that we had a downside climax, downside meaning red, obviously, on a down day. So that's a downside climax. This was an upside climax. All right. So what's the next thing? Well, first of all, I like to confirm whether I have the climax or not. And that is done mainly on the volume ratios. These are really handy for confirmations. Now, the New York Stock Exchange volume ratio, basically you're taking the up volume and dividing it by the down volume, and then opposite, of course, down divided by up volume on that ratio. So what you want to see are readings above 3. And that usually will give you a nice signal for a climax day. You can see we almost had that climax on Friday, but we didn't quite get all of the indicators to go in line with that. Although it looks like the behavior we're getting is signaling a similar, like it could have been a climax there, but with this reversal we're seeing. But let's go back. And I was going to talk to you about some of these prior climaxes, this one in particular, these two. So this one, you can see actually we had the climax a day before that. You had elevated up, down up volume ratio. And we already know that we had those climactic readings on that on the other chart. So these would confirm that we did get a downside climax. Now the question is whether it's going to be a reversal. Is it going to be an exhaustion of a downside move, or is it going to be an initiation of a new move to the upside? This one here, we had the sense of a continuation going on with that one. And certainly we did get another down day. So now that we had this one, what in the heck is it going to be considered? Well, it's downside, but now we got to look at what has happened before this climax reading. And we had a decline going on, which means more than likely it's going to be a reversal type climax. There's no need to consider it an initiation. We're not initiating any kind of a new move. We already were looking at prices moving lower. So this one right here, would have been considered an exhaustion climax. So it was a downside day, downside climax, and it is an exhaustion climax because it's coming after a move to the downside. Now, the very next day, we got another climax, this upside climax. So we got this climactic day, we got these very high readings to the upside. And so it was the first move to the upside. It was the first rally after a big decline. And it was a big move upward. We got high up down volume. We know that on this other chart, we also had these very high readings as well. You can see some back here. So we already knew that we had the climax. We'd had the exhaustion one the day before. Doesn't always work out that way. And so now we've got an initiation climax because we had all of the downside move and we're getting that reversal on very high up down volume. And it's an upside climax, but it is an initiation climax. We're getting ready to initiate a new move to the upside. Now, like I said, these climaxes can last maybe a day, maybe 2 days, or they can reflect a reversal point that maybe you'll get a little bit more action out of, like we did back here with a nice little rally. So the very next day, we ended up with another climax to the upside, right? But this time we'd already had that move to the upside. So now this would, I know it was only a day, but now it's become an exhaustion climax. And what happened? We got a down day, and that was followed by yet another climax. This is very unusual. We typically don't see these crunching up of these climaxes, but it kind of works out because I can give you a really good example of how these work. So now we have right here a downside climax after 2 days of upside movement. So that told me that that climax more than likely was going to be an initiation climax. Doesn't always work. Didn't work here. It was mainly it turns out that that was your initiation. These weren't really exhaustions. They were really just a continuation to the upside of this initiation. But it's really hard to say, you know, we're looking at this with hindsight, and that is, of course, 2020. Let's go ahead and look at the S&P volume ratios. It's a very similar chart, so we can talk about that as well. So let's talk about these late August climaxes that we have marked here. I'm going to tell you that when you look at the short-term climax chart that we just had up there, right here, these are the late August climaxes right here. You can see there's one there and there's one there. We've got here, we've got here. So we had quite a few climaxes come in near the end of August. So that's what we're going to examine next here on this SPY up-down volume ratio chart. All right, so we had high readings to the negative side. Our down-up ratio was over 3. We know that our climax chart had readings that were to the downside with total volume that was matching up. So this is, what is this climax going to be? Well, we're continuing out of a decline. So more than likely, this climax is going to be a reversal. This is going to be a downside exhaustion climax. We had 2 days of decline here, if you count that day. So that would give us the signal that more than likely this move is going to be exhausted and we're going to see higher prices follow. And sure enough, that's exactly what we got. And then we got another climax day, this time to the upside. All right, well, which one would it be? Well, we had one up day coming out of a reversal here. More than likely, this was going to be a continuation climax. And sure enough, we did see that move to the upside. Then we had another climax here in August. And again, you can look back. We don't usually get that many, you know, in bunches like that, but you know, at times you will. I mean, back here, it's pretty easy, right? We had very climactic downside behavior after a decline. that's going to tell you you have an exhaustion of that decline. Come over here. We now have upside volume ratio very high. And again, these are marked because our Climax chart on the other page also was showing a climax. The volume ratios are your confirmation. So if I've marked it on this, you know that the climax was also on that other chart. So now we ended up with an upside climax. Well, is it an exhaustion or is it an initiation? Well, before this were downside moves, so it must be an initiation. So it's telling us to expect higher prices in the next day or two. In this case, it turned out to be a pretty nice reversal point. Over here, we ended up with another upside climax. It was not quite so strong as we've seen on these others. So it wasn't surprising that this would have been read as what? An exhaustion climax. That's why it's in red. However, it didn't work out that time. Sometimes they don't. But the majority of the time, we do see them work out. So then we had the move to the upside, continuation, and then we had a big climactic day to the downside. That told us to expect that this is going to be an initiation to lower prices. Didn't happen the next day, but we certainly did see it the next day after that. And then boom, another downside climax after a day of decline. But we had up days prior to that. It would have been read more than likely as an initiation to the downside. Didn't see that, but we saw big numbers the next day to the upside, and that told us to expect higher prices with an initiation. I know this is going very quickly, so I'll try and go slow. So this one was your initiation. We ended up seeing another up day, immediately had a downside day with a lot of high up, down up volume. This is coming after a price rise, this decline and this downside. So that would be an initiation. Start looking for lower prices. That's what we got. The next climaxes we got were downside climaxes. First one being an initiation, continuing the downside move. The next one was your exhaustion climax with that big move to the downside, huge down up volume ratio. That was a signal for a reversal if there is none other. So there we go. Next one, upside, coming off of a decline. That's your initiation climax. Then we got another one right here. I know that when we saw it at the beginning, we were looking at it as an upside exhaustion, but it did turn out to be just a continuation of that upside initiation. Here's an exhaustion climax right here. Upside, exhaustion. We had up rising days right into it. All right, so let's keep moving across here. Hopefully this is sticking for you. These volume ratio charts are available on StockCharts. I believe we have these in the DP Market Indicator chart pack for StockCharts members. Just go to your account over here, manage chart packs, and then you can download the DP Market Indicators chart pack. So here we go. Initiation didn't work out. We ended up with a day that was up the next day and a climactic day to the upside, upside initiation, continuing. There we go. So now we're waiting for some more climaxes. Like I said, when I look at this from Friday, we did have those elevated numbers to the downside. Let's go back to look at Friday's numbers. But as you can see on Friday, we didn't have these outside days. So the volume ratio was telling us we might have a climax, but the rest of the indicators really weren't going in behind that. Certainly the VIX fell quite a bit, which could have been considered part of a exhaustion climax, but we didn't get that puncture of the lower band and we didn't have high total volume. So again, while I saw some of these climactic readings, and particularly on that S&P volume ratio chart, I didn't call it an exhaustion climax because I just didn't have all the numbers that I would like to see. So today we had an up day, like I said, a little bit of a 0.25% to the upside, but no climactic readings here. In fact, new highs are petering out. The VIX hasn't punctured that lower band and it's below its EMA. So that signals internal weakness. So I don't think we're out of the woods just yet. You'll be able to go back in time to see if I'm correct. But we did see very high total volume today on this move to the upside. I just don't like the rest of my indicators. Notice the contraction of new highs going on into this price rise. And of course, our PMO crossover sell signal moving to the downside. So let's go back and look very quickly at these ratios one more time. Let's go ahead and we will look back. Let's go back to the New York volume ratios. And let's go way back in time. So now you have, now we're going to run the little test and see whether you can figure out which one was which. And I'll tell you that it was very tricky coming back in here as to whether they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. So this one will need a little bit more time here to look at that. So here was this big move to the downside. It was the first day, second day of a very big downside move, and we had these very elevated readings. So what in your mind would you call that? The answer is an exhaustion climax. We already had 2 down days, got very, very high readings on that down up volume ratio. And so we were to expect that that move had been exhausted. And we did see 1 day, 2 day, and then we ended up with another upside climax. Now, the question here was whether this was going to be an exhaustion of that upside move. Granted, it was only 2 days, or was it going to be an initiation to higher prices? Because it came off of this downside exhaustion, I would have looked at this, and if I go back in time, I'm almost certain this is what I said, that this was likely an exhaustion, an upside exhaustion. So even though we had only 2 days, I was thinking of this more so as a possible exhaustion. And sure enough, that actually turned out. Then notice what happened here. We had very, very negative readings to the downside. So what climax would this be considered? It's coming in off of a decline. It's coming in after exhaustion. So this would have been considered a downside exhaustion. Downside because it's in the red. Exhaustion because we were already seeing lower prices here coming in. Sure enough, ended up with the move to the upside out of that. And then we had another upside climax, came in after a move to the upside. So I know when I looked at this one, I was considering it an exhaustion of the upside move. Didn't turn out that way, but we kept going and we ended up with another upside climax after all of this move to the upside. Clearly must be an upside exhaustion. And ultimately, we didn't see a decline, but we did see very weak price movement after that. All right, so let's go back for review. So here is our short-term Climax chart once again. So Climax analysis. We're looking at those days where you get a really high pop in total volume, or you see the VIX penetrating the lower band or the upper band, or we have a contraction or a expansion of new highs. Very important, breadth, net AD. we want to see those numbers also break out on the upside, or like in this case, to the downside. That tells us possible climax. Now we have to determine whether it is an upside or a downside. Well, it's downside if the numbers are red. It is an upside if the numbers are green. The big piece, the hardest piece, is determining whether it is an exhaustion or an initiation. And as I've said, your best bet is to simply look at what the prior move was going into it. Or you have a little bit of help from the VIX. In this case, we got those very high numbers coming in. The VIX had penetrated that lower Bollinger Band. We had higher new highs, a nice little jump there on those. And sure enough, initiation. So an upside initiation followed by this decline. All right, so this really should give you a pretty good idea of what we look for as far as climax analysis. Like I said, it can be, it's an art. I wish it were just an easy, yes, it was down, so now it's an exhaustion or it's an initiation just based on the trend of the market. But as you saw, it isn't always the way. But again, if we had indicators that were 100%, wow, wouldn't that be a great world? So we can go back here and just using the Climax chart, we'll just do a quick review one more time. I have 2 minutes. And you can use the PMO to help you out on this too. There's no reason why you can't use that to help you with confirming which way it's going to be going. So back here, high readings on new highs, but we didn't get the same readings here on the lows. Many might wonder, well, what are these dotted lines? On this chart, these vertical lines mark cardinal tops, major market tops. There you go. It's a great thing to add to your charts, I have to say, because it does break them up and it really helps you to see what happens during a certain period of time, whether the indicators are sliding up with price, whether you have negative divergences going in. There's a little bit of a negative divergence right there, price rising, negative divergence, and then there you go, we ended up with the price decline. So we're looking for those pops and new highs, those pops in breadth, and then we want to look for what's happening with the VIX, maybe what's happening with the PMO could be helpful as well. And then once we've figured out on our Climax chart, then we go to the volume ratios as a confirmation. And what you want to see, if it's an upside climax, you want to see a reading above 3 on the up-down volume ratio. If you have a downside climax, you want to see a reading of more than 3 on the down-up volume ratio. Those are your confirmations. So hopefully that helped you to understand more about DecisionPoint Climax Analysis. We find it very helpful. It's very easy to subscribe to the DP alert, and you will be alerted to all of the upside and downside climaxes as we get them. That's part of what you get as your subscription. And with that, I wish everybody happy trading.
Hey guys, Dave Keller here with StockCharts.com. Thanks so much for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, and we hope you did, hit the like button right below. Also, we have so much new content every day. Consider subscribing to the channel. Just hit the subscribe button in the video or right below. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Have a fantastic day.